Hey plant peeps, what's up? Welcome back to another video from Here But Not. Today we're going to be doing the Orchid Tag game. Thank you Marissa, the Orchid Nerd. She tagged me in her last video in the description. So it's been a video that I've intended to do for a long time, and we're going to get started with that today. If you're new to Here But Not, I'm Dustin, an orchid blogger who grows in Canada, and I'm just trying to provide some advice and insight on how I grow orchids in my climate and conditions for others like yourself. So the Orchid Tag game, if you're new to it, is just a question and answer type thing where you get to know your YouTube celebrity, which is me. And it's essentially a list of 13 or 12 questions where you cover things like where a person grows and what got them into growing orchids and things like that. I'm going to add a few new questions because what I don't like about the current or existing questions is they're very like me focused, and I feel like an audience is coming to learn about orchids. So yes, you probably want to get to know me a little better, and that's important and relevant, but you also want to have some like things you can take away from that, so that you can potentially grow orchids a little better in your climate, or at least just get like a little smidge of insight beyond just getting to know more about me. So typically when you do an orchid tag video, at the end you tag the next person that you want to do the orchid tag game. And I'm gonna kind of switch that up as well and put that at the beginning. I have 3 people that I'm gonna tag and then a caveat at the end of that. So number 1, I'm tagging Bennet Riley. We've been chatting on and off since he created his account, and he hasn't done an orchid tag yet, so tag Bennet, you're it. Second tag is Matt Polmanter. Matt and I have been friends for a long time. We talk on and off on Facebook and stuff like that. So what I like about Matt is that he has a very linear and logical approach to growing plants. I feel like in the same way that I do, and even if we disagree about certain things, he has a good way of like talking them through, and we learn together. So Matt, tag, create your video. And the last person that I'm going to tag is not an orchid person, and that person is the plant's Meow. She actually grows aroids and anthuriums and things like that. And I know that this is the orchid tag game, opening it up to the plant tag game. And the reason that I'm doing that is because I think that it's a good way for other YouTube content creators to kind of look at some things a little differently. So adjust the questions if you're seeing this, and if you want to do it, create it, tag some other aroid-based plant growers. And the last person that I'm going to tag is anybody who started a YouTube channel within the last year or two. I know that the premise of the Orchid Tag game is that tag, you're it, but the reality is those questions are there so that your viewers can get to know you better, and it's not intended to be like an inclusive group that you can't partake in. So if you haven't done the questions yet and you're a new YouTuber and you want to help, connect with your audience, then do these questions as well. They'll be in the link below. You can say that I tagged you because this is me tagging you, but don't view it as you're not part of like an in-group or something like that, because that's crazy and just like who cares, whatever. Just do it because it's a good way to have your viewers learn more about you. All right, so the classic questions, there's 12 of them. I'm going to read those off and answer them in sequence, and then after that we'll do the 4 new ones that I've created on my own that are more centric to potentially like advice rather than reflection, I guess. Number 1, which part of the world are you growing in? And if you've been following my channel for a while, I'm in Canada. That means that it's frickin' cold in the winter. It's -13 today, and we're in the beginning of November, midway through November right now. So while that may present certain problems or challenges with growing orchids indoors because it's drier, a lot more variable with temperatures, it's not preventative for the most part, right? Specifically, I grow in Calgary, Alberta, which is in the western interior part of Canada. Question number 2, how long have you been growing orchids, and can you remember which was your very first orchid? Plus, have you still got it? I have been growing orchids for a little over 10 years now. I started growing them in my parents' basement. I was really into Nepenthes, which are those carnivorous plants from Asia. I had a small greenhouse that I had set up indoors, and the Nepenthes were growing well, but slowly. I got a Phalaenopsis orchid from a friend who was like, "Oh, I know you're really great with plants, like give this a shot." Put it in the greenhouse, didn't have to do anything with it, and it grew very well. And that kind of triggered like the orchid bug, I guess. Since then, I have killed many orchids, and that includes the very first orchid that I ever got. And to this day, honestly, it was just like a simple white Phalaenopsis, but yeah, don't have it still. Number 3, what got you into the orchid hobby? Well, like I just said, it was actually the carnivorous plants and growing them in a like an enclosed terrarium type thing. That like greenhouse setup actually worked really well for a period of time, and I had lots of tropical plants and things in there. But then the seam on the greenhouse ripped, and in a very short period of time, I lost all of those plants. And that's kind of what started me on this idea that if you can grow orchids indoors without having to modify like microclimates inside of a box or something like that, then it's probably better, because what happens is if you grow them in really specific conditions like that in a terrarium, and then something happens like the pump breaks or the side of the greenhouse rips, then you potentially lose all your plants in like a very short period of time, because plants adapted to really high humidity are not able to transition quickly to really dry conditions that I already grow in. Question number 4, what type of growing space do you have? Windowsill, greenhouse, blah, 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 blah. Clearly I grow by the windows, but I also use LEDs so that I can take advantage of space that doesn't have any windows and grow more plants. And of course, if you've been watching my channel, you know that I love the LEDs for being able to grow the seedlings and other highlight species that maybe I couldn't necessarily grow just by the window. Number 5, how many different genre of orchids do you grow, and do you know how many you grow exactly? The answer is no, I don't know how many I grow exactly. I have an affinity for Phalaenopsis, Phragmipediums, and Paphiopedilums, because they have the most like unique looking flowers in my opinion. Phalaenopsis maybe not so much, but some of the worm growers, if you've watched my previous videos, they just offer so many like good things, like lots of flowers and fragrance and blah 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 blah. In terms of individual counts of each of the genre, I do have a spreadsheet where I track them all. I think about 40% of my collection is Phalaenopsis, and then it's like 18% is Paphiopedilums, and then it goes down from there. Frags I love, but they're space hogs. So the ones that I have, I covet and cherish, but I don't have a whole bunch of Phragmipediums just because they beef up pretty quick and they need big pots, which I like, but it means I can't have like a whole bunch of them by the window. Number 6, do you know how many orchids you actually have? And the answer is no. On an individual count, I don't, because for example, if you have a flask of seedlings, do you count every single one of those as a plant? I have estimated through counting generally that I have about 300 to 400 plants, and then about 180 different species or hybrids within all of those. All right, so number 7, what is your top orchid peeve? And this one is challenging for me because I have a few peeves. I think that the biggest peeve for me comes down to people recommending a growing method for other growers when they don't have good insight into the challenges that grower may face in their climate, water, conditions, blah, 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 blah. That said, I also, when recommending, like giving advice to people, often don't know all of those individual things. So typically I ask where they're from, and if someone's growing in a very tropical, hot, or humid climate, I tend to be like, I don't have experience growing like that, so I don't think that you should take my advice necessarily as strongly as you might take somebody else's. That said, I do objectively think that there are better ways to grow orchids. you have media that have worked for decades versus new attempts to force methods of growing that maybe are less tested and vetted. I'm trying to choose my words really carefully because I know that certain methods of growing have a fanaticism around them, and that's okay. I'm not trying to say that it's right or wrong. I don't want to offend people either. Hey, look, the sun came out. How awesome. Number 8. Number 8, where are your favorite places to buy orchids? Single-handedly, my most favorite place to buy orchids is always at an orchid show, because there's this like crazy energy, there's tons of people, tons of plants, and there's like this excitement of like, oh man, what am I gonna get today? And so many plants that I've bought at an orchid show were ones that I had never planned on buying that ended up being like really interesting and unique plants in my collection. So hands down, an orchid show. Just if you've never been, be prepared, because when you go, it's a little overwhelming. It's probably not what you expected. There's a lot of people there. It's very crammed in, and you kind of gotta make a first pass to find out what's available, and then a second pass to try and find out what it is that you want. So, good luck. Number 9, what's the worst orchid advice you've ever been given, and did you take it? And the answer is yes. I did take the advice, and it was to grow in semi-hydro. And because my climate is so dry, and I thought that it was going to be an easy solution to grow plants better based on other people's perspectives and comments online, I blindly followed it without understanding that you need to modify and adjust variables to your own climate. And for like a couple years, I killed a lot of plants, and I blamed it on me not being able to grow them properly because of my climate and all these other things, which later on I realized that you can use different potting media to compensate for a climate that maybe isn't as ideal. And I recognize that semi-hydro is a really great solution for a lot of people, and it allows them to water less, hypothetically. But I also think that if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And it doesn't, that means that you can't just blindly recommend one method of growing to everybody. But I've also learned a lot since then, and you know, that's part of growing orchids and the hobby and all of those things. So it's winter right now. I'm supposed to be asking you question number 10, which is, out of the orchids you own, which one is your favorite? Show us, blah, 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 blah. But as you can see, one of the challenges that I face growing in Canada, way the hell north, is that in the winter, the sun drops lower in the sky and comes all the way into our condo. So I'm gonna have to switch up where I'm filming. But it's an interesting point that I wanna make, because this problem that I'm having right now in the summer doesn't happen. It's the opposite. The sun goes over the roof, which means I get virtually no rays of direct sun. Hey Clyde, how you doing, buddy? No rays of direct sun into the condo, which means a lot of things like Cattleya and Vandas you would think would do well here, but they actually don't, because they don't get direct sun during the summer months. Anyways, so back to question number 10, but I'm gonna move. All right, so out of the orchids you own, what's your top 5 favorites? No problem, let me show you. This one is Phalaenopsis CTL VO Sapphire. It smells like sunscreen in a good way, and I frickin' love this plant because it's just a weed in my conditions. And you know, I've never seen this available anywhere else, so I feel like I lucked out when I got it. And people always ask me, where did you get it? And I'm like, at an orchid show, funnily enough. But I don't know where you'd find one. I have tried selfing the flowers, so I am hoping I can get seeds off of it, but I have a feeling it might be an aneuploid, which means it has an odd number of chromosome counts and is less able to breed well. So we'll see. This is looking maybe pretty good, but we'll see. On to other orchids. Another favorite that I often talk about, Macotes petola, the jewel orchid. This thing grows like a weed for me. I love it. You can't tell in videos, but the leaves sparkle, kind of like flecks of gold are in the vein, which I just think is really, really beautiful and a cool orchid. And it helps that it grows well, because if it didn't, I probably wouldn't like it as much. Next up is Phragmipedium Samuel Crothers. It's not necessarily like the favorite orchid of mine, but it's the group of Phragmipedium cavachii hybrids because they create pretty vigorous plants. The flowers are quite big, and I have 3 or 4 others that I am like really looking forward to growing. And so that whole group of cavachii and cavachii hybrids are definitely at the top of my list. Number 4 is my gigantic Phalaenopsis. For me, it's just such a cool and huge plant. And I just love, like it's huge. Look at that thing. Like, I'm still in front of it. So it's like, it's an amazing plant. It's huge. And it's so basic because it's a no ID. But we're good friends. And the last of my favorites is a new upriser in my collection. I got these flasks from Equigenera last year, and they are growing like weeds. And it's Epidendrum cockii by Sophrontis something. I'll post the video there. But when I first got them, I was like, well, they're supposed to be cold growers. They might not do very well for me because I'm growing indoors. And because it's a Sophrontis hybrid, I was worried that it might need really high light, which clearly the LEDs are providing. But in the last 3 months, this thing has, like, all of the seedlings have done very well. I haven't lost a single one, and they're at a point where they're branching and growing. So the next step is to see what the flowers look like, because if flowers are ugly and junky, then it will very quickly not be one of my favorites. Question number 11. Have you got an interesting or funny orchid-related story? And I do. It's also kind of a sad story. And it kind of coincides with when I was growing semi-hydro. It was right at the end of the 2-year kind of period when I was doing the semi-hydro stuff. And we used to live out in, like, on an acreage outside of Calgary. And I had left the house in the middle of winter. It was minus 30 degrees outside. And I had closed the door, but it didn't seal. I assume because there was ice or something around the base. And after I left, the door blew open. And until my family got home, the house had the door wide open and minus 30 degree weather. And that cold air went into the house down to the other end where my orchids were. And plants, all of my collection was kind of down at the opposite end. And it, in the cold temps, ended up basically finishing off what already weren't doing well. It was like a final blow and killed about probably 35 or 40% of my plants. So when I came home after that, I ended up tossing a whole bunch of things because a lot of stuff was damaged and just looks bad. I stopped growing orchids for about a year or two, aside from the few that were left. And it was a bummer. And I felt stupid about it for a long time. Very, one of those things you're just like, man, why did I do that? But funny story, takeaway, make sure you close your door, especially in the winter. All right, question number 12, which is the last set of questions for the classic group of questions. What advice do you have for a new grower? That's pretty easy. Like when you're getting out and you're starting, there's a lot to learn. So I recognize that it feels like there's a whole crap load of things you need to know. Orchids aren't necessarily complicated, but you need to understand the various rules and how those affect you in your climate to grow them well. So test out different things, see what works for you, try different species. If you're testing different variables though, like if you're trying to learn how to grow a Phalaenopsis in your home, try a few different methods on that one group of plants before you go and move to a different group of plants. Because if you are growing a Cattleya, they tend to do well with dry roots, and so they're going to do better in semi-hydro, for example. But Phalaenopsis don't like super dry roots, and they want to have like a wet-dry cycle. So if you're trying to experiment and learn how these things operate in your own climate, and you're working with different species and different genuses while exploring different variables, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Obviously, do whatever you want, try different things out. But if you're experimenting for potting media and temperature and water and pH and all of these things, try and stick it with the same group of plants so that you're kind of evaluating the same variables together. All right, so on with the new questions, and I have 4 of them. Number 1, Sorry, 4 questions, and they're all more directed towards advice and recommendations and like thoughts on care and growing for others, rather than all the things you didn't know about me and possibly didn't care about how I grow. So number 1, what are some or one orchid care tips you learned in the past that fundamentally changed how you grow orchids and how you achieve success with keeping orchids? And the answer to this question for me comes down to light. I know that I had said I was growing in a basement. It had an east-facing window. I did get lots of light, and the plants grew and did well, but it wasn't until I started buying LEDs. Like this is an east-facing window, and I still run additional LEDs here because I don't get enough light in the afternoon for a bunch of these plants. And since adding LED lights and understanding how light works for plants better than I did before, I've been able to grow a lot more. The challenge that I think a lot of people face with light and orchids is that everything online says they grow in low light, but our eyes don't detect low light very well. And when we're talking low light for orchids and plants, we're not talking about dim light in your house. If I even move in away from the window into this area of my home where there's a wall, orchids do not grow in these like behind the wall areas. Visually, it looks bright, and you'd be like, wow, Dustin has a bright home. He should be able to grow orchids literally everywhere. But they don't grow well unless they specifically are getting filtered sunlight for a portion of the day. So when we say low light, we mean low filtered light, not low ambient visible light, because our eyes can see pretty much in near darkness. And that means that if you're like, where should I place my orchid? And you're thinking you should place your orchid in a bathroom, for example, that has one tiny window that doesn't actually like filter any light directly to the plant, that's not going to be enough. And most people, the struggles that they have with orchids, I feel, comes down to light. Like this is very bright, right? So that is a fundamental understanding that when I finally started testing light, I was like, wow, I did not realize how fast orchids actually grow. Just be careful though, because there is also the other problem, which is too much light. Sun creates heat and you can burn leaves, and my windows are triple pane because I live in Canada where it's really cold. So we need to insulate for cold, which also has the effect of blocking a lot of like natural sun. So while my plants look like they're in full-on direct sunlight, that is not full-on unfiltered exposure where they're going to potentially burn. So when you're dealing with this stuff in your own home, understand that your windows might be different than mine, that the aspect of filtering, you can put sheer cloths up and protective layering on your windows, and there's multiple ways of getting filtered light. So don't see it as like, oh, well, Dustin's are in direct sun, therefore I too must also put them in direct sun, because if you burn the leaves on your orchid, it is a permanent burn, like it kills the tissue. And that can happen both from heat, generally from heat, but also from intensity. If you put certain types of orchids under too much LED light, you'll see that their leaves start to get chlorotic or yellow spotting. And if it continues past that and they're unable to deal, or they don't have mechanisms, like they can't change their leaf color to deal with the intensity of light, it can cause chlorophyll death or cell death, which you don't want to have happen either. Next question, what is your favorite orchid genus and why? Really sell it to the person. And like I said, I have a lot of Phalaenopsis because they're fragrant, they grow well, they're quite fast, surprisingly. I didn't know this, but Phalaenopsis orchids can put out, 3 to 5 leaves a year. Sometimes I'll get 2 leaves growing at the exact same time. So a happy Phalaenopsis, super rewarding. Lots of flowers, like I said, sometimes fragrance. So to me, they're my favorite genus just because there's like 80 or 70 or 80 different species, and each one of those has like some really unique characteristics that go far beyond what we see in the grocery store. Plus, they just are easier to grow, and that's a perk for me. Number 3, do you have any top secret orchid tips? And please do share them. So I think that sometimes people will like learn things about orchid care and then they keep it close and they don't want to tell other people because it gives them the advantage. And I've seen it happen, and I've had it run through my head too, and I think that at the end of the day, it's a challenge to grow orchids no matter what. Hey, kitty. It's a challenge. Oh, sorry, microphone's all buffed up. It's a challenge to grow orchids no matter what. So even though what I feel is a bit of a secret, or you may feel is a bit of a secret, it still may not be for other people. That said, for me, the secret has been organic fertilizers. I use a product called Gaia Green, which has back guano, feather meal, rock dust, a whole bunch of stuff. And it's really good, clearly. Beefs up a bunch of my orchids. I think it offers a lot of the micronutrients that maybe a soluble fertilizer doesn't account for. And I'm becoming more and more of the perspective that organic offers more than just hydration and microclimate. It offers flora or fauna within the potting media that allows plants to extract more nutrients than what they would in an inorganic media. So my top secrets that I never ever tell anybody, but I like really do tell everyone, is essentially like rock dust. Like it's a blended thing, but organic media, or sorry, organic fertilizer, and that doesn't fully replace my soluble fertilizers. It's just something that I add 3 or 4 times a year, and I still use I still use soluble fertilizers as well, but that's my top secret. I am bouncing around because that sun is moving really quickly. It's literally only like 10:30 in the morning, and I've had to change positions like 4 times because the sun is moving like right across the sky and screwing up my lighting. But that's okay. So last question, do you have any weird orchid related rituals? What are they? Tell us about them. So this, I think, is just an interesting like thing because people are unique and weird. And we have kind of 2 of them. One, Brian and I will make puns. So are you kidding me? And Cymbidium and what is it? Fragrant. I've done that a few times. I think that's hilarious. So we whenever we go out, we make orchid puns. He's not even an orchid guy, but he's clever, and so I appreciate that. And I think that ritual has like brought my hobby to the rest of our life, and I think that's pretty cool. The other thing we do is we give our orchids people names. Not all of them, but some of our favorite ones we definitely have named. And I think that gives, I've heard of people calling their plants like he or she, which I'm like, well, technically they're both because they have pollen and a pod, so you can't really call them he or she. But people can do what they want. And part of that is personifying plants so that you care more about them, because then they become essentially family members, right? And so this is Harlequin. It's a Harlequin fowl. Brian and I like to watch a lot of movies and comics, including DC and Marvel. So this is Harlequin, and then I have, which is his, and then I have Poison Ivy, which is my Zingman Anaconda hybrid. And then Poison Ivy and Harlequin are best friends, and they hang out. Unfortunately, Harlequin's just had a pod open up, and I sowed those, so I have no flowers on her right now. All right, so that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching the Orchid Tag video. Again, people I'm tagging: Matt, Bennet, the cat's Meow. No, the plant's Meow. If you guys see the video and want to make your own, please do. And then if anybody out there has a new channel and they haven't done an orchid tag yet, do it. Like, you don't need a guy like me to like tap you on the shoulder. Do it. Say that I did. Say Dustin tagged me. And then post your video link below. And what I'll do is I'll put it in the comments, and then you've been officially tagged. And I'll also put it on my blog post, which has every single one of the orchid tag videos that I could find in sequential order of the date that they were published. So I'll also put that link below. And then if you're like really into this and you want to know all the other YouTube people who do orchids, you can kind of follow it based on their orchid tag video. Other than that, I hope things are well with you. The seedlings are progressing along nicely and life is good here. I will continue to make more videos. Have a great day, guys. Ciao.